I need to tell you about the one night that wasn't supposed to mean anything, and the 6 words at the end of it that ended up rearranging my entire year. My name's Caleb Hayes. I'm 28. I work in IT support for a mid-sized insurance company, the kind of job where half my day is spent explaining to people that turning their computer off and on again actually does fix most problems. I'd been living with my roommate Theo for almost 3 years at that point. A 2-bedroom apartment that worked mostly because we'd figured out the right amount of distance to keep from each other. Friendly, but not intrusive. The kind of roommate situation that runs on mutual respect for each other's headphones. Theo's sister, Ren, had come up a handful of times before, but always quick visits, an hour for lunch, a quick hello before she headed somewhere else. I'd met her exactly twice in 3 years, both times in passing, enough to know she existed, but not enough to actually know her. So when Theo mentioned she was coming through town and needed a place to crash for one night before an early flight, it didn't register as anything beyond a logistical detail of my week. "She's just gonna take the couch," Theo said, not even looking up from his laptop. "In and out. You probably won't even notice." "Noted," I said, and went back to my own evening, not thinking about it again until she actually showed up. She arrived around 8 that night, duffel bag over one shoulder, looking like she'd been traveling most of the day already, hair a little windblown, the specific kind of tired that comes from one too many connecting flights crammed into a short trip. Theo wasn't even home yet, stuck at work later than he'd planned, so I was the one who answered the door. "Hey," she said, a little surprised to see me instead of her brother. "Caleb, right?" "Right. Theo's running late. Come on in." She stepped inside, dropping her bag by the couch with the kind of practiced efficiency of someone who'd learned to travel light and move fast. "Sorry to just show up like this. I know it's a weird ask, crashing with people I've met twice." "It's fine. Theo warned me. Mostly." That got a small laugh out of her. Mostly is doing a lot of work in that sentence. "He said you'd take the couch and I probably wouldn't even notice you were here." "Accurate," she said, glancing around the apartment. "I'm extremely low maintenance when I'm exhausted, which is most of the time these days." I offered her something to drink, more out of habit than any real plan to spend the evening talking, and she accepted a glass of water before settling onto the couch with a tired exhale that suggested the day had taken more out of her than she was letting on. "Rough trip?" I asked, mostly making conversation while I waited for Theo to get home. "Rough year, honestly," she said. "The trip's just the latest chapter of it." I sat down in the chair across from her, not committing to a full conversation, just leaving room for one if she wanted it. "You don't have to elaborate if you'd rather just collapse into the couch." "No, it's fine. I actually don't mind talking about it to someone who isn't already deep in the middle of it." She took a sip of water, considering how much to actually say. "I quit my job 2 months ago. Big dramatic resignation after my manager took credit for a project I'd basically built from scratch. Then my apartment lease fell through because my roommate decided to move in with her boyfriend without telling me until it was basically already happening. So now I'm sort of living out of this duffel bag, bouncing between my parents' place and a couple of friends' couches while I figure out what comes next. That's a lot to be carrying around in one bag. You'd be amazed how much fits if you're motivated enough," she said with a dry little smile. "I'm flying out tomorrow morning to interview for a job in another city. If it works out, I move there in a month. If it doesn't, I guess I keep bouncing." I found myself genuinely interested in a way I hadn't expected to be, given that I'd planned on this being a quiet, forgettable evening before her early flight. "What's the job?" "Marketing director for a mid-sized design firm. It's a step up from anything I've done before, which is exactly why it terrifies me a little." Good terrifying or bad terrifying? She thought about that for a second. Good, I think. The bad kind of terrifying is when you're scared because you know it's wrong for you. This is more like, I'm scared because it might actually be right, and that's a different kind of pressure. I like that distinction more than I expected to. That's a pretty sharp way to break that down. "I've had a lot of time lately to think about the difference," she said. "Comes with the unemployed and couch surfing territory." Theo got home about 20 minutes later, and the three of us ordered takeout, ate around the small kitchen table. The conversation easy and a little chaotic in the way it gets when siblings start telling embarrassing stories about each other from childhood. Ren had this dry, quick sense of humor that came out more once she relaxed, and I found myself laughing more in that one dinner than I usually did in a week of my normal routine. After Theo went to bed early, citing an early morning meeting, Ren and I ended up still sitting at the kitchen table, the conversation having shifted into something quieter, less performative than the dinner banter had been. "Can I ask you something?" she said, turning her glass slowly on the table. "Sure." "Does Theo ever talk about me? Honestly, not the polite version." I considered how to answer that. "He mentions you sometimes, says you're the more put-together one of the two of you, which I think he means as a compliment, even though it comes out sounding a little resentful." That got a real laugh out of her. Put together. That's funny, given the current state of my life is basically one duffel bag and a borrowed couch. "I don't know," I said. Put together doesn't always mean having everything figured out. Sometimes it just means handling the chaos without falling apart in front of people. She looked at me for a second, something shifting in her expression, like she hadn't expected that particular observation from someone she'd known for a grand total of 3 hours. That's a generous way to frame unemployment and homelessness-adjacent couch surfing. "I'm an optimist, mostly out of necessity. I'd support breaks you down fast if you're not." "Fair point." She was quiet for a moment, looking at the table instead of at me. "Can I tell you something that's probably too honest for someone I just met?" Given the tone of the evening, sure. "I'm scared this interview tomorrow is going to go well," she said. Which sounds backwards, I know. But if it goes well, it means actually committing to something again, building a life somewhere again. And every time I've done that in the last few years, something's pulled it apart before it had the chance to actually settle. So part of me almost wants it to go badly, just so I don't have to find out if this is the time it falls apart too. I sat there for a second, recognizing something in that fear that felt closer to my own life than I'd expected. The way I'd settled into this apartment, this routine, partly because building something bigger felt riskier than staying comfortably stagnant. "I get that," I said. "More than I probably should, given I've got a pretty stable life by comparison." "Stable doesn't mean immune to that fear," she said. "Stable just means you haven't tested it in a while." That landed harder than I expected. That's annoyingly accurate. "I've had a lot of time to get annoyingly accurate about avoidance lately," she said. "Comes with the territory." We talked for another hour after that, well past the point where either of us had planned on staying up, covering things that had nothing to do with the practical logistics of her one-night stay. She told me about growing up moving around because of her dad's job, never quite putting down roots long enough to feel like anywhere was actually home. I told her about the slow drift of my last relationship, the one that ended quietly a year and a half ago, not from any single dramatic moment, but from two people realizing they wanted different shapes of life, and neither one willing to bend. "Sounds like we're both professionally avoidant," she said at one point, smiling. "Just in different flavors. I prefer to think of it as cautiously optimistic. That's just avoidant with better marketing." I laughed, and something in that exchange settled into a kind of ease that felt strange given how recently we'd actually met. Like the conversation had skipped past the careful early stages most people go through and landed somewhere more honest, faster than it had any right to. Eventually, it got late enough that we both acknowledged she had an early flight and needed actual sleep, not just a couch and good intentions. I set her up with extra blankets, said goodnight, and went to my own room, half expecting that to be the entire extent of the story. A strange, unexpectedly good conversation with my roommate's sister that would fade into a pleasant memory by the following week. I got up early the next morning, around 6, mostly out of habit, and found her already awake, sitting on the couch with her duffel bag packed and ready, scrolling through something on her phone with the kind of nervous energy that comes before a big interview. "You're up early," she said, looking up. "Habit, you ready for the flight?" As ready as I'm going to be, which isn't very. She set her phone down. Thanks for letting me crash here, and for the conversation last night. I didn't expect to actually talk about real things with my brother's roommate of all people. I didn't expect it either, honestly, but I'm glad we did. She stood up, slinging the duffel bag over her shoulder, the same practiced efficiency from the night before, and we walked together toward the door, the easy quiet of two people who'd had a genuinely good conversation and weren't quite sure how to close it out. At the door, she paused, turning back to face me, something more deliberate in her expression than the casual goodbye I'd been expecting. Can I say something a little strange? She said. Given the last 12 hours, sure. I don't usually do this, talk like that with someone I just met. I'm not usually the type to let my guard down that fast. She shifted the bag on her shoulder, looking for the right words. But last night felt different, easier than it should have been, given the circumstances. And I don't want to pretend that didn't happen just because the timing's inconvenient. It's a little inconvenient, I admitted. You're about to fly to interview for a job in another city entirely. I know. Which is exactly why I'm not going to make some big declaration right now, because that would be ridiculous, given I've known you for 12 hours. She smiled, a little nervous, a little sure of herself at the same time. But I'm not going to pretend this was nothing either. So, what are you saying? She looked at me for a long second, the morning light coming in through the window behind her, the duffel bag heavy on her shoulder, a flight waiting that could change the entire shape of where her life went next. I'm saying, she said slowly, that whatever happens with this interview, wherever I end up, I don't think this is over. I think I'll be back for you. I stood there for a second, genuinely not knowing what to say to that. The strange weight of those 6 words landing somewhere I hadn't expected a stranger's sister to land in the space of one evening. That's a pretty bold thing to say on your way out the door, I said eventually. I'm aware. I'm choosing to say it anyway, because the alternative is pretending I didn't feel something just because it's logistically complicated, and I'm tired of doing that with things that actually matter. You don't even know if the job's going to happen yet. No, she said, but I know I want to find out what this is, regardless of where the job lands. So consider this me marking the moment instead of letting it disappear into a polite goodbye. I didn't have a clever response ready, which is rare for me, so I just said the honest thing instead. I'd like that, finding out what this is. She smiled, the real kind, not the dry, careful one she'd been doing most of the night before, and reached out to squeeze my hand once before pulling the door open. I'll text you when I land. And again after the interview, regardless of how it goes. I'll be here, mostly low maintenance myself, in case that wasn't clear. Noted, she said, echoing my own word back at me from the night before. And then she was gone, the door clicking shut behind her, leaving me standing in the quiet apartment with the strange, settled feeling that something real had just started in the space of 12 hours I hadn't planned for at all. Theo came out of his room about 20 minutes later, surprised to find me still standing near the door like I was processing something. She already leave? He asked. Yeah, about 20 minutes ago. Cool. Told you. In and out, you'd barely notice. I didn't correct him. Some things felt too new and too fragile, yet to explain to a roommate over morning coffee, especially when I wasn't entirely sure myself what had actually happened the night before, beyond knowing it had mattered more than a casual overnight visit had any right to. She texted me that afternoon, just like she'd promised. A simple message saying she'd landed and the interview was in 2 hours. I texted back something supportive, trying not to read too much into the fact that I was checking my phone every few minutes, waiting for an update like it was the most important news of my week. The interview went well. She called me that evening instead of texting, voice bright with the specific relief of someone who'd just cleared a hurdle they'd been quietly terrified of. They offered me the job on the spot, she said. Well, pending some formal paperwork, but basically on the spot. I start in a month. That's incredible. Congratulations. I know it's a lot, she said, more careful now. New city, new job, and somehow in the middle of all that, a thing with you that I started by saying something dramatic on my way out your door. I haven't forgotten. I meant it, she said. For what it's worth, I wasn't just saying something dramatic to make an exit memorable. I figured I've been checking my phone like a teenager all day, so I think I'm fairly invested in this too. She laughed, that same real sound from the night before. Good, because the city I'm moving to is about 2 hours from where you are. Close enough that this doesn't have to stay a one-night conversation if we don't want it to. I don't want it to. Me neither. We talked for almost 2 hours that night, the conversation picking up right where it had left off the morning before. Easy and honest, in a way that still surprised me, given how recently this had all started. Over the following month, while she wrapped up her old life and prepared to move, we talked nearly every day. Video calls some nights, long voice messages on others when our schedules didn't line up, slowly building something out of a foundation that had started with one unplanned night on a couch she wasn't even supposed to remember past the morning. I drove the 2 hours to see her properly for the first time about 6 weeks after that morning at my apartment door. Once she'd settled into her new place and her new job had stopped feeling quite so overwhelming. She opened the door, and for a second, we both just stood there, the strange reality of finally being in the same room again after a month of screens between us. So, she said, here we are, properly this time. No early flight forcing a dramatic exit. No early flight, I agreed. Just us, actually figuring out if the thing we started in 12 hours holds up over more than a screen. And? She asked, eyebrow raised, the same dry humor from that first night fully back in place, now that the nervousness of new beginnings had settled. And I think it's holding up just fine, I said, and she smiled, the kind that reached all the way to her eyes this time, no careful hedging behind it. We've been together over a year now. She still jokes that the most efficient relationship starting strategy is apparently crashing on someone's couch for exactly one night and saying something slightly dramatic on your way out the door. I tell her it worked better than any actual dating strategy I've ever tried, mostly because neither of us had time to perform for each other. We just had 12 honest hours and a sentence that turned out to mean exactly what it said. Theo still doesn't fully understand how a one-night couch stay turned into this. He likes to remind us both that he specifically told me I'd barely notice she was there. I remind him that he was wrong about almost everything, except the part where his sister turned out to be the most interesting person I've ever shared a kitchen table with for one unplanned evening. I think about that morning a lot, the duffel bag, the early light, the way she paused at the door instead of just leaving, like the moment hadn't mattered. It would have been so easy for both of us to let that conversation stay exactly what it was supposed to be. A strange, pleasant overnight stay between two people who probably wouldn't see each other again. But she chose to mark the moment instead of letting it disappear, and I chose to believe her instead of writing it off as something said in the rush of an early flight. That's the part I keep coming back to, not the 6 words themselves, but the fact that we both decided to take them seriously instead of letting convenience erase something real. So tell me, if someone you barely knew said something like that on their way out the door, something that sounded too bold for 12 hours of knowing each other, would you have believed them? And have you ever had one unplanned night turn into something neither of you saw coming, just because somebody refused to let it disappear into a polite goodbye? Let me know down in the comments. And if this one got you, do me a favor, like the video, subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you in the next one.